Have you ever wondered why the Japanese attacked the naval air base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, but then went back home right after without having conquered the archipelago? If you've always had this question, today is your lucky day because I'm going to answer it for you. Stay with us. Before we get started, I'm going to let you know that after many requests from our audience, I finally launched the Sustainable Development Goals Academy, an environment where, for the first time, we'll be able to study in a linear way, much more complex content than what I present here on the channel over at the Sustainable Development Goals Academy. You'll be able to take our courses, get certified by them, and have the guarantee that you'll progress in your knowledge about World War II and many other conflicts. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, is one of the most studied and debated episodes in all of military history. It was not only a bold operation, but also the turning point that led the United States to fully engage in World War II. The images from that day, the battleships burning in flames, the planes destroyed in their hangars, and the sailors trying to save their comrades under the rubble, became etched in the collective imagination as symbols of vulnerability and of the response that followed. However, alongside the well-known narrative of the attack, there is a question that intrigues both lay people and experts alike. Why didn't Japan go further? Why, having achieved initial success by surprising the United States, didn't they try to occupy the Hawaiian archipelago, turning it into a forward base in the Pacific? An operation like that could have changed the course of the war? This question has fueled counterfactual hypotheses. For decades, alternate history writers have imagined scenarios in which Japanese flags waved over Honolulu. Some strategists have wondered if such boldness could have isolated the United States from Asia, allowing Japan to consolidate its greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. But real history shows that this option was never seriously considered. Understanding why requires taking a close look at the composition of the force that attacked Pearl Harbor, the so-called Kido Butai, which was, up to that moment, the largest and most powerful carrier fleet ever assembled. It was the heart of the strategy conceived by Admiral Soroko Yamamoto, and its structure reveals both the reach and the limits of that attack. The attack on Pearl Harbor could not have been carried out by just any naval group. A balanced force was needed, capable of crossing thousands of kilometers of ocean without being detected, launching hundreds of aircraft against distant targets, and then returning safely. Japan assembled the core of its naval air force for this mission. 6 frontline aircraft carriers, escorted by cruisers and destroyers, supported by tankers that would provide the fuel along the journey. The boldness of the operation lay precisely in betting that aircraft carriers would be a central piece at a time when many navies still considered battleships to be the true symbols of naval supremacy. The core of the Kido Butai was made up of 6 large aircraft carriers. The first of them was the Akagi, which was the flagship of the force. It was originally conceived as a battle cruiser, but was converted into an aircraft carrier during the 1920s. It had the capacity to carry about 90 aircraft and also served as the command post for Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, the commander of the operation. There was also the Kaga, which was also the result of converting a battleship and had a similar capacity to the Akagi, carrying between 70 and 80 aircraft. The Soryu and Hiryu were smaller but faster aircraft carriers, capable of operating with approximately 60 aircraft each. They were considered modern and well-suited for operations. The Shokaku and Zuikaku were the newest and most modern in the fleet. They had entered service only in 1941 and had the capacity to operate about 80 to 90 aircraft each. With very high speed and well-designed hangars, they represented the state-of-the-art of Japanese naval engineering. Together, these 6 aircraft carriers carried approximately 440. The composition of these aircraft included Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, Aichi D3A Val dive bombers, and Nakajima B5N K torpedo bombers. This combination allowed Japan to attack both naval and land targets simultaneously with high effectiveness to protect these aircraft carriers. The Japanese also deployed 2 heavy cruisers, the Tone and the Chikuma, both from Kajima. These ships had the particular feature of concentrating their main battery at the bow, freeing up space at the stern to operate reconnaissance seaplanes. In the attack, they played a crucial role in monitoring the area surrounding the aircraft carriers. There was also a light cruiser in the Kidobutai, Abukuma, from the Nagara class, which served as the command ship for the destroyer fleet. This group, made up of 9 destroyers, was responsible for the anti-submarine and also anti-aircraft defense of the formation. This surface group wasn't very large, but it was suitable for that mission. After all, the bet was on surprise and also on aviation, not on traditional naval battles. Alongside this main fleet, Japan sent no fewer than 27 submarines to patrol around Hawaii. Among these were some that carried mini-submarines, with 2 crew members who were supposed to infiltrate the harbor and attack the ships anchored there. The operation of these mini-submarines was quite unsuccessful. Most of them ended up sinking or running aground, but the presence of the submarines demonstrated the Japanese intention to overwhelm the American defense by various different means. Perhaps the mini component, less glamorous but absolutely vital, was the 8 tankers that accompanied the Kidobutai. Without these, the journey of more than 6,000 kilometers between Japan and Hawaii would be impossible. These ships refueled the aircraft carriers and cruisers on the high seas, allowing the fleet to remain hidden in remote waters until the moment of the attack. This logistical detail already shows why a land invasion of Hawaii was unfeasible, simply because, to carry out a 2-day air attack, Japan needed such a meticulous refueling effort. Imagine what it would take to sustain an entire army on the island of Oahu. Just wait to find out the size of the American fleet that was in Hawaii and could eventually face the Kidobutai. I'll tell you about it in a moment, okay? But did you notice that the Kidobutai was designed with a very clear goal in mind? And that's very important in the context of such a big war like the one Japan set out to fight. The American Pacific Fleet had 8 battleships, 3 heavy cruisers, 9 light cruisers, and dozens of destroyers and submarines. There were also about 400 aircraft based on the islands. This concentration, which the Americans believed to be a sign of deterrence, became an ideal target for the Japanese. The absence of the American aircraft carriers on the day of the attack was a very decisive coincidence. The Enterprise and the Lexington were on aircraft transport missions in the Pacific, and the Saratoga was undergoing maintenance in California. Did this absence deprive Japan of the chance to destroy the future key air assets of naval warfare? The composition of the Kidobutai reflected a profound doctrinal shift in the Japanese high command. Japan, more than any other navy then, heavily relied on aircraft carriers as a main war tool. This vision anticipated a true revolution in naval warfare, the supremacy of embarked air power over the great battleships. However, the very specialization of the fleet also exposed its limits. Kidobutai was assembled to launch a surprise attack, not to conquer territories. There were not enough transports, landing troops, battleships for coastal bombardment, or the logistics needed to maintain a large force on land. The fleet's composition showed that invading Hawaii was not part of Japan's strategy. And in this way, on the morning of December 7, 1940, the attack on Pearl Harbor was launched. And in this video here, you can check out minute by minute how everything happened during that epic action that finally brought the United States into World War II. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor is in itself a major and unavoidable milestone of World War II. In just a few hours, Japan managed to surprise the United States, destroy a large part of its battleship fleet, and cause thousands of casualties. It was a very bold operation, well planned and executed with impressive military discipline, but Pearl Harbor was also the beginning of the end for the Japanese Empire. Because by directly attacking the United States, Japan awakened an industrial and military power that until then had remained relatively neutral. The war, which was already global, now became total. Although devastating, it did not achieve all its objectives. The American aircraft carriers were not present, and fuel depots and repair workshops were also not destroyed. And above all, the United States was not intimidated, but only galvanized. The attack, which was supposed to give Japan time to consolidate its gains, ended up accelerating its defeat. And in light of this, it's not surprising that many people ask, but what if Japan had gone further and instead of just bombing, had landed troops and occupied Hawaii? This counterfactual temptation is quite understandable. The idea of a Japanese flag waving over Honolulu really sparks the imagination. It suggests that Japan could have isolated the United States, turned the Pacific into a Japanese lake, and secured the much coveted states. A careful analysis shows that this hypothesis, although fascinating, was not feasible. The first barrier to overcome was logistics. To conquer Oahu, Japan would need between 100,000 and 150,000 soldiers. They would be transported on hundreds of transport ships, supported by battleships and a continuous flow of supplies. And none of that was available to them. By December 1941, Japan had already committed its merchant navy to simultaneous operations elsewhere. The Philippines, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and also the Dutch East Indies, which is present-day Indonesia. Their transport fleet was limited, and their industry was not able to expand it quickly, even if, by some extraordinary effort, Japan managed to land and conquer Oahu. The next problem would be even bigger, holding that position. The Hawaiian archipelago is 6,500 kilometers from Japan. Supporting a garrison of 50,000 men there would require constant supply convoys, crossing routes that would soon be filled with American submarines. The dependence on oil made that whole equation even more unfeasible. Japan needed to conquer Southeast Asia to secure its supermarket. Diverting forces to conquer Hawaii meant precisely preventing the achievement of this vital objective. On the American side, the Japanese occupation of Hawaii would only have the effect of accelerating their total mobilization. In 1941, the United States was already the largest industrial power on the planet. From 1942 to 1945, its military output exceeded that of Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. This tide of resources would be unleashed with fury against an invader. Submarines would patrol the entire Pacific, destroying Japanese convoys. Mass-produced Essex-class aircraft carriers would launch massive attacks. Long-range bombers could reach Oahu by flying directly from the American mainland. And when superiority became overwhelming, an American counter-invasion would retake the archipelago. For the United States, there would be no alternative. Hawaii was an integral part of its territory. Recovering it would be a matter of national honor. And in the rest of the globe, a Japanese occupation of Hawaii would have produced paradoxical effects. Instead of weakening the United States, it would strengthen its determination. And instead of delaying the war, it could accelerate it. In Southeast Asia, Japan would have fewer resources for its offensives. The oil from the Dutch East Indies could remain in Dutch hands for much longer, strangling the Japanese Navy. Great Britain, although under pressure, could resist much better in Malaysia and also in Burma. China could receive more Allied support, and the Soviet Union would be relieved knowing that Japan could not open a front in the east of the country. In summary, the invasion of Hawaii would not change the final outcome of the war. It would only redistribute the weight of the effort, perhaps shortening the conflict in the Pacific. By precipitating a Japanese collapse, the study of the hypothesis of invading Hawaii reveals lasting lessons for military history. The first of these is the importance of logistics. Courage and boldness alone do not win wars. Without transport ships, without fuel, without supplies, no force can sustain itself. The centrality of industry is another important factor, because Japan, even victorious in some battles, could not compete with American production capacity. The outcome of the conflict was already written in the Japanese factories and shipyards with lower capacity. We also have to consider the risk of a country setting too many objectives for itself. Japan, in 1941, was already taking risks by attacking so many targets at the same time as it did. Adding Hawaii to the list would greatly multiply its problems. Let's also take into account the political reaction of the opponents, because attacking Pearl Harbor was already enough to unify the United States, but occupying Hawaii would only amplify that reaction. Underestimating the enemy's political will is a fatal mistake. Some historians even compare the hypothetical occupation of Hawaii to the Battle of Stalingrad, which took place down in the south of the Soviet Union. Both would be battles of attrition, with surrounded garrisons, without supplies, fighting to the last man. The difference is that, while Stalingrad represented the collapse of the German offensive in the east, an occupied Hawaii would represent a self-imposed strategic collapse by Japan itself. It would be the choice to turn an initial victory into an unsustainable trap. And, in the end, the analysis converges on a very clear conclusion. Japan could not have won a war against the United States, even if it had occupied Hawaii. The balance of resources and the geography of the Pacific were completely against them. Pearl Harbor was the ultimate act of boldness. Going beyond that would simply cross the line between courage and total madness. Pearl Harbor remains in historical memory as an ambiguous symbol. At the same time, it was a brilliant tactical strike and a strategic disaster. Japan managed to surprise the United States, but by doing so, it sealed its own fate. The idea of invading Hawaii is very useful, not because it could have changed the outcome of the war, but because it clearly illustrates the limits of military power when divorced from logistical and industrial reality. It shows how, in war, it's not enough to ask what would be desirable, but rather what is actually possible. In December 1941, what was possible for Japan was to attack by air, buy time, and also consolidate its gains in Southeast Asia. Occupying Hawaii was simply out of reach. That's why, when we revisit history, we can conclude that Pearl Harbor was not just the day the United States entered the war. It was the day when Japan, at the height of its boldness, began the path that would lead it to inevitable defeat. But even knowing all that, do you still want to know what a Japanese invasion of Hawaii would have been like? You won't want to miss it because that's the topic of our next video. Is that okay now? Tell me, do you agree with my observations? Do you think Japan had any chance of successfully occupying Hawaii and gaining any real advantage from that action? Tell us in the comments below. And if you want to learn everything about strategy and tactics by analyzing military maps from World War II, be sure to enroll in our course Strategy and Tactics on the Map. Think like the generals of World War II. Enrollment is open with a promotional price for a limited time. And all you have to do to enroll is click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen. Join Academia Sustainable Development Goals as a student. I'll be waiting for you. And if you want to understand everything about the atomic bomb project, how it was developed and used, buy my book here, The Atom as a Weapon. Share this video and subscribe to the War Room to stay updated. I'll stop here. Thank you again for watching, and here's a big hug from the War Room.